You're doing great, Stephen.
Yeah. Welcome back to everyone.
So much.
Hopefully they all have closed out the breakout rooms. Go ahead, Father Steve.
All right, let's go back to sharing screen.
Bigger than life.
Let's see, hold on. View, play. Okay. There we go. Uh-oh, hold up. Uh-oh, I'm failing on screen sharing. Let me try that one more time. There we go. Okay.
We can see.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a bit about microaggressions. And so this is going to be the way in which any biases that we have fostered and that have been integrated into the way in which we will negotiate relationships. These are the ways in which they play out in harmful ways. And we're going to talk about that harm a bit later, but I want to share with you the top three types or forms of microaggressions that are out there. Now, before we begin, just the understanding about microaggressions, they are remarks, behaviors, and actions that are expressed of held biases and stereotypes. It's important to understand that these things might come from a place that is, I'm going to say, for some, they're innocent. For a lot, they're not innocent. And I think that has to be reckoned with. I think coming to an honest place about where these come from. If any of you have been a sharer of any of these, is important, is really important. But let's go into the types. So there's verbal microaggressions. And so these are usually questions or statements that are given to people that are based upon stereotypes of their ethnicity, their race, their gender, sexual orientation, or any other aspect that has been highlighted as a source of disparity, a source of disparity. So any group that has been placed as a minority group, any group that is an oppressed group. These are the questions and the statements that actually come to them. So if you can take a look at let's look at the cartoons, because those are two very interesting ones. So we see a woman, obviously of the Muslim faith, who is being told, you were born in Canada, as a question of real not curiosity, but confusion. And then the gentleman holding the card next to her says, you have a mental disability. You seem perfectly normal to me. Now, these are the things that are given with much presumption and much of an energy of an accepted stereotype by the person who offers the microaggression. I'll tell you one that I hear a lot of, and it may not be so evident tonight because I find myself using the word a lot, but people saying, wow, you're so articulate. And as if to say that a priest that must go to a theology school must have an advanced education, or somebody who has been shown to be very capable to lead a conversation and to do leadership is now being put on a different level when it comes to articulations or the ability to speak, which, as I say, is probably eluding me now. I'm sorry, I've lost you all. You all have disappeared from my screen, and I'm finding myself to be a little confused here. Just one second.
We are still here.
Okay, there you are. There you are. Okay, all right. You disappeared from me for a moment. So the calling of me as being articulate, obviously to me, it sounds to me like somebody is saying to me, for a Black man, you are actually speaking very clearly. You know what it is that you're saying, and you're able to communicate that to us pretty well. So that's the way that it comes across. It's important to understand that with microaggressions, this is what I was saying earlier, that we have to be as deliverers of this communication, we have to be very much aware of how the person is actually receiving it, and to be very clear about our intentions here, because in a world that, or in a society that has been so divisive and so calamitous when it has come to over the border kinds of communication. So that means people who are on disparate sides, whether it's race, whether it's socioeconomic status, gender, whatever it might be, those kinds of interactions have been contextualized in our world as, very almost very contentious these days. Or on the other end, looking at the other, particularly if there's a downside or an underdog, as a project. So for example, if I were to have a conversation with someone with a brother or a sister who is unhoused or who is homeless, then I need to be, as the communicator, I need to be aware that the situations and the circumstances and the experiences that my brother or my sister has had really makes a whole vocabulary or a whole aspect of my language harmful, very much painful. And so when I say certain things that might seem pretty innocuous to me, comes across as hateful, then I need to be very much aware of that, and I need to take responsibility for that. Okay. Otherwise, it continues to be perpetrated as a microaggression. Remember, there's a lot of pain in our world today, and particularly people who have been treated as less or as underdogs, um, really need to be given the benefit of healing words. And all of my folks on the Spirituality Network might agree with me here that we might need to learn a bit more on nonviolent communication when it comes to having these kinds of conversations, particularly those that really convey any microaggressions. I'm going to move forward on here. We're going to come back to that in a little bit, but I'll move forward from here. Behavioral microaggressions are the same sorts of things, but they're actions rather than words. And so when you see someone who has a particularly interesting hairstyle, and to reach out and just to touch it, as someone who's curious of it, or I'm sure that that's not at all something that we do, but it is one of those things that just needs to be looked at. So just, it's any aggression or any behavior that is while on the giver's sense seemingly innocent or based on curiosity, to the recipient, it's horrendously offensive. All right. And more on that a little later too. I want to talk a lot about environmental microaggressions because they don't get as much play. Environmental microaggressions are when certain policies or standards of practice are upheld regardless of regardless or without sensitivity to the people who are in the room. So here's a great example of that. When something of a quantitative or mathematical issue is given to, say, a man versus a woman accountant, or when a project or an idea is given to a particular sect of people and not to another, when there is an equity of talent and adaptability that is in that place. I'll give you, I have to give you like a particular example here. This is one, as I tell it, I might have to take some time and just breathe. When I was first starting out as a meeting planner in my profession, I was one of the first African American male meeting planners in the associations that were in DC. And I will never forget this one time that I went to a particular conference, and the conference organizer was asking for some people to help out with a particular project that the organization was doing. I volunteered, and I came to a couple of meetings to get a sense of what it is that they were doing. I knew full well I was very much capable of doing it. And I was the only male and the only African American that was in that room of 14 people that were involved in this project. And at one point, the project manager actually comes in and says, "So I'll need to have the registration, uh, all the registrations for this conference and for this project to be managed by someone." And she picked out one lady and said, "You seem like you might be able." She said this out of her mouth. "You seem like you might be able to do this pretty well," and so gave this to one lady. Then there was another project for the complaints booth. Now that's my forte. Give me all the complaints, I can handle them. And I actually said, I'm very good about establishing a troubleshooting network of people and can handle the complaints pretty well if you want me to go ahead and take that. And she said, "Oh, that's really nice. Thank you very much. But I think that I want to give this to such and such because she seems like she might be able to handle it." So with all of the projects that were available, and projects that I was very much capable of doing and made it known that I was capable of doing them, none of the projects were given to me. Now, one might wonder how many projects there were in this big project that the manager was handing out. There were about 22 of them, which means that there were some people that actually got more than one project to do. Now, how many did I get? None. And I was the only one that didn't get any. Uh, and my boss shared with me the possibility of why that was the case, and said, unfortunately, this happens to be a female-dominated industry, and they are pretty close-knit, and they are very much aware of their own situations where they probably do want to favor each other. And I got that from a social perspective. But in a situation where we have been all volunteering to take care of this particular project, it felt very, very clear to me that I was left out because I was a man. Now, I know that seems to be a bit of a flipped example of what a lot of folks go through, but I need to put this out here because the thing about environmental microaggressions is that, and any of these microaggressions, by the way, is that it just doesn't happen to the underdog. And the environmental microaggressions are the ones that I really want to use as a highlight here. It just doesn't happen to the underdog. The truth is, if we look at the composition of our realities, there's some aspects that put us at a disadvantage wherever we find ourselves, that put us in the out group. Maybe it's male, female, maybe it's black, white, maybe it's old, young, maybe it's blonde, brunette, whatever it might be, there's a factor that we embody that puts us in some way in an out group. And the question that I would have for each of us to really look at is, at the beginning, I was talking about whether or not we have been perpetrators, but the question also is whether we have been victims of microaggressions. Have we ever been on the receiving end of a comment, a behavior, or an environmental circumstance that um, seem to put us at a disadvantage for something that has happened or has been indeed painful. I gave you, excuse me, I gave you my example of being told that I'm articulate for a Black man. I gave you my example of being left out in a situation that seemed to favor one group over mine own. I'm curious about you, and I want us to kind of take a moment to think about that, because my hope is this begins the process when we think about microaggressions, is first of all understanding them a little better, but then secondly having the effect of microaggressions to resonate with our need to be more open and more respectful for others. This becomes a way that we can identify with being hurt or with being on the receiving end of microaggressions, to be able to be open, which is going to be the composition of our next section. I really am so sorry, everybody. I'm just running through this so quickly because we're running out of time, and I don't want to keep you longer than I need to. So why don't we take some time and just think about that? I'm very curious to know if any of us have ever been on the receiving end. Have we ever personally experienced or witnessed any microaggressions? And to use that as a way by which we might begin to be more open and compassionate towards the other, which we're going to talk about in the next section here. So hearing about these microaggressions, what say you? Karen, can we have everybody go back into the
All right, breakout rooms are opened.
Okay, Karen, you know what? I'm sorry about